Welcome to Recovery with Root, a podcast centered on topics surrounding mental health and addiction. Through our Advanced Recovery Institute, a new entity of the Root Center for Advanced Recovery, we are committed to research and training to elevate clinical care. We hope you find this podcast informative, and most of all, we hope that it helps improve the lives of others. Remember, we're in this together, and recovery is possible.
Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Recovery with Root. My name's Margot Farrell, Chief of Staff here at the Root Center for Advanced Recovery. We've got an interesting topic on deck today. It is Problem Gambling Awareness Month. We talked about this topic last year when this came about, and sad to say that I feel like it's only gotten incrementally worse here. We've got some experts with us joining us on the show. We've got David Ruela, Program Coordinator at Amplify, and Fiorgio Fetta from the Behavioral Health Program Manager at DMHAS. Guys, thank you so much for being here today. Really important discussion to have with you guys. So to start things off, David, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you've noticed? I mentioned that last year we had some of your colleagues on the show and we talked a little bit about problem gambling. I myself am not a gambler, but we do have problem gambling groups here at the Root Center. And I just feel like anytime I'm watching TV, I'm driving on the highway, it is just in your face. It seems to have really exploded. What are you noticing on your end?
So it's interesting that, I started in this role at Amplify about 2 years ago. And before I started, I had no experience in kind of the gambling prevention. And over the past 2 years, I run what's called the Regional Gambling Awareness Teams. And we just talk about gambling as a whole. So what are we seeing in the schools? What are we seeing in the communities? Especially what we're seeing in those vulnerable populations. When I first started, I really only thought it was, casino players or those people, that were going to Atlantic City or going to Las Vegas. What I'm seeing a lot is online sports betting. Really get to see a lot of the casino work. I see a lot by the People's Bank Arena, so the old XL Center. A lot of times when you're in the stadium, the good thing is we see a lot of problem gambling messaging. But as far as youth are gambling. We don't want to sugarcoat it. It might not be your typical casino gambling, but they are definitely talking about sports betting, especially those people that are athletes, right? They're way more likely to engage in those risky behaviors such as gambling and even, sports betting. So that's kind of what we're seeing a lot in the youth and that young adult age that's going off to college, right? Those people they getting their first jobs. They're getting their, what we would say, adult money. And, they don't really know how to budget their finances. So they turn to gambling as kind of an idea to kind of make a lot of money.
Fiorgio, how do you want to add on that? I'm sure, you can probably reiterate a lot of those same sentiments.
Yeah, Margot, thank you. David brings up a lot of great points. And as you brought up earlier as well, it's so ubiquitous in our society. Gambling is everywhere, and it finds its way to integrate in different facets of life. As we've talked about, there's a casino, as you and David mentioned, there's the lottery that's out there, there's the online platform. In 2021, Connecticut expanded our expansion of gambling to include sports betting, online casinos, and the online lottery. And with that, yes, as reported, the marketing has increased significantly. So it's everywhere. And, there's even the integration into behaviors that aren't normally considered gambling. Like we're seeing integration into video gaming and, nostalgia hobbies like card collecting. We're seeing integration of gambling like mechanics that are in there. So it's everywhere. It's so normalized though that we don't always recognize the concerns that could come with the behavior.
And you guys also both mentioned this seems to be targeting younger and younger demographics, specifically young men. Can you speak about maybe the increase in seeing that? I remember last year when we were talking about sometimes in Gamblers Anonymous groups, it was always kind of targeted to, they use the quote like old timers. And now we're seeing, kids that are barely into their 20s with access to this.
I think that comes with the exposure, Margot. I think the integration and the level that we're seeing it's out there. It's hard to watch a television program without seeing an ad for, some of the platforms that are in Connecticut, like FanDuel, who is partnered with Mohegan Sun, and DraftKings, who is partnered with Foxwood. So it's absolutely out there. When we look at what this looks like, technically you need to be 21 if you're able to gamble legally for sports betting, for the online casinos. But it blurs a little bit because if you are 18, you can participate in daily fantasy sports, which is offered through those sports betting sites. So, knowing the legal age is important, but it varies based on the type of gambling behavior that you're participating in.
And David, what kind of a slippery slope does that present, with kids starting out at a younger age?
I love that you say that because I talk about this all the time in every meeting that I have. I grew up as an avid sports fan, so I watched sports my entire life. I grew up on, before school, before you go to the bus stop, you're watching the Sports Center top 10 plays, right? They're talking about the games from before. Nowadays, I can't even have my nephews sit down and watch ESPN because it's just constant, ads about DraftKings, FanDuel. There's constant talk about odds and gambling. It's just so ingrained into just the sports culture in general, where people we used to look up to, like Charles Barkley and Shaq and all these great people that we thought of. Now they're just promoting these parlays every single chance that they get. So it gets pretty different. A lot of times with the youth, for example, we want to mention that a lot of these casino games, for example, it's coming with a gamification, right? So if a kid is playing a video game per se, whether that be a Fortnite or anything like that, a lot of people don't realize those loot boxes and skins are also considered gambling, right? So somebody that's getting introduced to that as a young age and then is going off into the real world, they're already exposed to gambling. Just like how we used to say people that used to go to the horse tracks with their grandparents when they were younger, right? They kind of grow up getting into the gambling world because they see it at a young age. And I think that that's a not really a good connection that a lot of people are struggling to make right now.
And do you see a little bit of crossover too? Does it kind of open the door once you get familiarized with the virtual setting? What's the crossover like with people then maybe going into the casino world and just expanding gambling? Does that kind of, almost dip their toes in the pool and give them a taste of what's out there and then maybe encourage them to want more? Is that kind of a trajectory that you see?
Yeah, I think it's interesting too because if you look at it, back in the day, if people wanted to make sports bets, they had to go all the way to Las Vegas and those kind of in-person places to make those sports bets. Nowadays, I could pull up my phone right now in the middle of our meeting and put down a sports bet or play some blackjack, right? The ease of access is just way too normalized right now, right? Kids can be in the middle of their college lecture and just be in the back playing blackjack. And I know Fred could speak a lot about this.
Yeah, no, David, absolutely. I mean, when we look at research on marketing, there's a reason that these companies spend a lot of money to market because the more exposure you have to it, the more it's in your face, the more likely you're going to participate in it. We know that with gambling marketing, the more you see it, the more likely you will participate. We know that from studies that we see, as David brought up on loot boxes, where we're seeing this element in video games where, video games are for all ages, but youth heavily participate in video games. Those that are spending more on loot boxes are more likely to gamble problematically later on. So we are seeing this connection with these gambling-like mechanisms in games or behaviors that are more prevalent with youth.
How do you think that we could begin to combat this? Like what's being done at DMHAS, what's being done at Amplify to try to fight this messaging and fight the powers that be, because it just seemingly seems like a monster that just keeps getting bigger.
From the DMHAS perspective, for our work across the lifespan with DMHAS, prevention does lifespan. DMHAS, if we're looking at treatment, is 18 and older, but from our youth perspective, our prevention coordinator, Kelly Lepard, works very closely with David on the gambling awareness regional teams. So as far as bringing folks together that are doing work with youth to make them aware, this is a behavior that comes with risk. We got to understand this like we do substances. I think as a cultural society, we know substances pretty well. We just don't know gambling that well yet. Although it impacts our brain just like substances does, it acts a lot like substances, and it's within the same category of the DSM-5, for those that aren't familiar, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, how we classify behavioral health disorders. Gambling is within the same category as substances. So when we're talking about addictive behaviors, it's important to have this conversation. There's youth that's going on within public media campaigns where youth are working on creating media to talk about what gambling is like, to talk about the harms of gambling. So trying to raise that awareness from a peer-to-peer perspective is one of the elements that we're working on. We're doing work with college programs to raise awareness about the impacts of gambling. So, I think our prevention marketing has grown as far as keeping this behavior safe. than it has in years past. And I think it's helped to at least raise the awareness that this behavior is not a risk-free activity. So let's understand that if there's concerns, knowing where supports are available, and try to keep it safe if you're participating.
David, what would you add to that?
Educate, educate, educate. So I always tell people that we have great resources in the state of Connecticut. I would say we're the gold standard, right? We really have to educate our youth. So when we talk about like other substances and just the prevention kind of as it was back in the day, like we could look at it now, why are kids not smoking cigarettes as much as they used to, right? It's because we went into the schools and we gave that in that education aspect. I think that what we're doing right now, especially kind of working in hand with our local prevention councils in our region, is we're making sure that gambling is getting talked about. A big issue that I run into, especially kind of when I go into like those middle school age, is a lot of administrators might say, hey, these kids aren't on the casinos, right? They're not going to the casinos. They're not old enough to gamble. And a lot of parents will tell me that. And I say, hey, we need to be able to introduce this, right? We have to be able to have this conversation about what gambling is so we can pick up on those behaviors and kind of build that prevention across the lifespan, like Fred was saying.
Well, and especially if, like you're saying, a lot of them might not be gambling, but they may be playing video games, which is kind of setting the stage for a lot of those thought patterns, correct?
So it impacts that same dopamine level that we're seeing with gambling, that we're seeing with substance use. Again, we're just not as accustomed to understanding it with behavioral related practices that could get to the point of addiction like we're seeing with substances. I think, when we're talking about drugs and alcohol with youth, it's important to talk about these behaviors like gambling, like if there's integrations of gambling type of behaviors in video games that, look, we got to balance this. We got to understand that there's risk that comes with this. There's reasons that we have legal ages for you to participate because your brain is more developed at that point. And so, on our prevention, we want to make folks aware of that. Look, if there's an element of gambling within a game that's for youth, we really want to try to delay playing that until someone is of a safer age.
What do you say to someone who may be watching this and who's debating with whether they might be struggling or not, thinking that perhaps their habit is getting a little bit unhealthy? Where do you kind of start? How do you, get ahead of it before it kind of gets out of control?
I could jump in on here. I think there's a lot of research. Like I said, Connecticut's the gold standard for kind of gambling prevention. I look at it, what kind of point of view are you looking at? Are you looking at as a concerned parent? Are you looking at a concerned family member, coworker, anything like that? I usually tell people the best thing to do is, if you're a parent, is get connected to somebody that's well-versed in this, somebody that knows a lot, right? Every single town in Connecticut has access to what we call as a Regional Behavioral Health Action Organization, which is an RBHAO. So they do everything prevention related. And thankfully, we have a full-time coordinator at every single RBHAO in Connecticut where you can actually get a lot of this gambling information and you can actually get help to see, where is my next step? None of the RBHAOs provide any clinical work, but we could always point you in the right direction. Right. We have a lot of great resources, especially for parents, right? They can access those regional behavioral health action organizations and get kind of the prevention overview, and they can get, pushed into the right direction. Right. We can give a soft, warm handoff to our better choice provider. So I know Fred could definitely talk a lot more about that. But even if you're just trying to get education, I've had parents that have called me and asked, hey, can we get this education into our children's schools? And I said, yeah, the best thing you could do is talk to your administrators, have them work with those regional behavioral health action organizations and get that gambling education integrated into the health curriculum.
Yes, no, David, good points. I mean, so, my end is more the clinical end with DMHAS. So my roles is I oversee the Better Choice Gambling Treatment Programs for the state of Connecticut. I oversee our disorder gambling integration programs, which actually Root Center is one of our programs. And that's why you might be seeing more gambling integration there, Margot, because of the work that you're doing to integrate gambling. So with the Better Choice Gambling Treatment Programs, these are our treatment providers in the state of Connecticut where we're treating individuals working through a gambling disorder and loved ones impacted. And as I mentioned earlier, for treatment, DMHAS is 18 and older, DCF is under 18. And so what we try to do from our perspective is we're treating the adults there. We can do family work to take care of the whole family, but we're trying to educate some providers that are providing youth-related work on building competency here. So, if you're starting to see more youth, as we're starting to see more screening occur where we're assessing youth for concerns with gambling, we do need to have those providers that have the skills, that have the knowledge of this to provide treatment.
And I think you touched on something also that was really important. You talked about loved ones impacted. I think sometimes that's something we also don't think about, is that gambling, much like a lot of others, substance use and a lot of other addictions and ailments, it ends up impacting a lot of people in folks' circle. Can you talk a little bit about the family impact or the loved one impact that this can have?
Yeah, I mean, I think it helps, when I present on this topic, and for those that have more of an expertise with substance use, I think it's important to have that substance use hat on, because you're going to see a lot of similarities with this behavior that you see with substances. There are differences, but there are a lot of commonalities within the addiction realm. So loved ones feel that impact too, just like someone that may be using drugs, a spouse can be impacted, children can be impacted. And it's the same thing we're seeing here. If someone is gambling problematically, we may not have money to take care of our basic necessities like the food. There may not be money to go out and to have some of the entertainment things that we've done before gambling became problematic. There are behavioral health disorders that loved ones impacted are working through. And with the current expansion that we're seeing more younger individuals having challenges with gambling, we're seeing an increase of parents, especially sons, that are having concerns coming into treatment. So there is significant impacts that happen on the family and not just the person that's working through the gambling disorder or having problems with gambling.
Yeah, so they say that for every one person that's working through a problem with gambling, about 7 to 20 people a part of their life are affected. So whether that be immediate family, coworkers, sports teams, right? Anybody that's in that person's kind of circle. We want to be completely transparent when we talk about this, right? Gambling, people that have that are engaging in problem gambling, they have higher risks of suicide, right? So this is where a lot of the good benefits of an RBHAO also comes into play, whereas we have those regional suicide advisory boards that are funded, but we would like to kind of get more funding involved with there so we could really integrate our gambling work with them. So all the kind of QPR trainings that are going on, so it's question, persuade, refer, we like to kind of integrate a lot of gambling into that, or try to at least get the conversation started, just so we could provide that support as much as we can.
That's a pretty staggering statistic. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? I think that's shocking we know that men's mental health is not talked about nearly enough. We know that men usually are the ones to complete suicide if they do in fact attempt it. So that's pretty shocking and really scary to hear that that's the level it can progress to.
Yeah, I think one thing that our partners at the Connecticut Council on Problem Gambling do is they have the helpline. So you could text, you could chat, you could call at any time, and somebody with lived experience will be able to pick up on the line and talk to you. You could also use the 988, which is the crisis line. So you could call that and be able to talk to somebody about everything that you're going through, right? So we want to make sure that all these resources are accessible to everybody, even people that don't even have the ability to call or text, right? We want to be able to make those accessible. So if you go into your local, Root Center, or if you go into your local Wheeler clinic, right, you could always get those resources that are available, right? We want to make everything as low cost as possible.
And Fred, I assume that's the same over on the side of DMHAS. Again, that's just such a staggering statistic to hear.
It is. And I think that's where the concerns we have. I know a lot of times people will see gambling and say, well, look, it's just a behavior. You need to stop it. We don't understand that this is an addiction just like other substance use disorders. And, prior to doing my work with gambling, I was doing clinical work with mental health, with substance use. And I was surprised when I entered the realm of gambling that I saw a lot more suicidality than I saw in other areas. And, I would see the research that shows higher prevalence. If you look at the DSM-5, looking at individuals in treatment, 50% had suicidal ideation, and almost 1 in 5 had some attempts. So it's really significant. But when you really break it down, you take a behavior here that's already really stigmatized, someone's working through it, and oftentimes it comes out when it's at a really helpless place. You think about the impact of finances in society. If you don't have a gambling disorder, it can be hard to make ends meet at time to time. Now, if you think about having thousands of dollars worth of debt, and now I can't provide for my family, I can't do the things I used to do. There's a lot of co-occurring disorders that occur with gambling, where if I'm already working through a depressive disorder, I have this on top of that. Imagine how that may exacerbate the conditions there. So it helps to understand how it gets to that level. But again, over on a regular societal level, we don't know about the impacts that we do, like David and I have seen through the course of our work.
So I guess here, just to wrap things up, speak to the person who's in the full throes of it, who, and maybe we talked earlier about the person who may be just starting to think, okay, I think this might be a problem. Now speak to the person who knows they have a problem. Where's the first step? Where do you turn to? Where do you go?
I would say you're not alone, right? There's this gambling it's becoming a big thing right now. It's going to be even huge, I would say, in the next couple of years. You could call the Connecticut Council on Problem Gambling Helpline. So you could access that through calling it, you could text, you could chat, or you could speak to a loved one, right? Talk to somebody about what you're going through, right? You could call all the great resources. If you're a parent that's concerned, right? If you're seeing things that are kind of out of the ordinary, connect with that regional behavioral health action organization and try to put it in the right direction.
Yeah, no, that's great, David. And as we were talking earlier with the marketing that's out there, one of the things that was legislated when online sports gambling, online casinos, and the online lottery were implemented is that at the end or sometime throughout the course of that marketing, they had to talk about the helpline number, as David said, and the Connecticut Council on Problem Gambling's website. So I think we've raised more awareness about how to find help. On the DMHAS end, we have our DMHAS-funded Better Choice gambling treatment programs that are available. If you go on our DMHAS Problem Gambling Services website, you can find that provider that's within your area. And again, they offer help for those individuals that are working through a gambling disorder or problems gambling and loved ones impacted.
Awesome. Well, David, Fred, thank you so much for both of your help. We'll be, of course, linking any pertinent information to DMHAS and also to Amplify to give people just additional resources. Remember, we also have problem gambling programs here at the Root Center. You can attend in person in Manchester or also virtually. So a lot of options. And as David said so beautifully before, you are not alone and there is help out there. So guys, I really appreciate your time and insight.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, we hope you enjoyed this episode of our podcast, Recovery with Root. As always, stay connected with us on social media to learn about when next podcast episodes will drop. You can comment, ask questions, even let us know about future topics that you'd like to see discussed. Until next time, remember, progress is the destination.